Heidi, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's an absolute pleasure. Now, I think you're based in Sweden, right?
That is correct. I'm based in Malmö, Sweden, so we're just across the bridge from Copenhagen.
That's absolutely amazing. I want to start with your story. How'd you get into venture capital? I think you were a founder before this, so let's talk about how you got here today and what's your story been so far.
Sure. So I think mine is a quite unconventional VC story. My background was actually in human rights. I used to make documentaries on social and global issues. So I was traveling around the world making documentaries on, child soldiers in Uganda or the civil war in Sri Lanka or press freedom in Guatemala, for example. And, I, of course, saw a lot of problems on the ground and a lot of human struggle and, felt the kind of heaviness of all the terrible stuff happening in the world. At the same time, I was intrigued by the tech bubble and what was happening in tech. And I felt that there were so many things that business could solve, and of course not a lot of those huge issues, but still there were things that could be done to make things easier on the ground. And I felt like tech is such an amazing tool if it's in the hands of the right people. And I thought that I know tech and business can't solve everything, but I do think that there's more things that could be solved if we were using business and tech to actually solve real world problems. So that's kind of where my interest started. And then I went into the kind of tech scene and really tried to figure out, honestly, how to get in. And it was very hard to penetrate the scene. I thought, I mean, I'm from Finland, I'm a white female, and I felt like I just wasn't welcome in the scene. Like it was really hard to get meetings. People just weren't really open to it. So it took a while. But anyway, I kind of started figuring out how to build and try to like learn JavaScript and really try to figure out like how do I, how do I find a co-founder? How do I find someone who can build, because I obviously knew that my limited JavaScript skills weren't going to get me to build anything myself. But anyway, long story short, I then built a few companies myself, and went through the whole journey of a founder. Um, and yeah, raised some money, lost some money, worked with really awesome, great corporates, and learned a lot on the journey. And then yeah, ended up starting a few businesses. Neither one of them were very successful in the end. After that, I first started an accelerator in London, and worked on that for a while. And after which I moved to Sweden to join an accelerator, which my now partner at Pill the Dot had started, and we worked on that for a while. And from there, we said, "Hey, let's go all in." That climate is the biggest humanitarian crisis that we're facing right now. It is an enormous problem. We need really smart people from all around the world to come together and solve these problems. And we also need everyone to be kind of welcome to use tech as a tool to solve problems. So I kind of felt like there's so many things from the things that I tried to achieve, even from the days of kind of going into tech bubble, that kind of came together. So to like long story short, I think it's always been about impact for me. It's been about where can I as a person have the most impact. And I loved building myself, but I also realized that I really enjoyed being on the enabling side. I enjoyed helping startups fundraise, and I enjoyed try to open the door to people that I thought should be in tech, because there weren't enough people who were welcome into the tech scene essentially. So yeah, long story short, but that's how I got here. And yeah, I essentially became a VC because I wanted to see more people from different sectors, different gender, different backgrounds, um, as VCs, because I thought that it's a huge responsibility to give out money, and we need more all kinds of people to do this. So I decided to just become one myself.
It's fascinating from documentaries to now being a venture capitalist. Yeah, it's something you don't see. It's a very rare story, certainly. Now, I normally ask about fundraising, but you mentioned impact. You mentioned you want to maximize the impact you were making personally. Now, a lot of young founders with a lot of high potential I speak to from a variety of backgrounds, they're often kind of engulfed in the world of SaaS and AI, and that's kind of what everyone's paying attention to. But when I have folks like you on who are paying attention to industries that maybe are a bit higher barrier to entry, but you could still build something in, I like to ask, if you're a young founder today, it doesn't matter where you're from or male, female, doesn't matter. You know you want to make an impact. You know you want to solve big problems that matter for humanity. I know like building and climate, it's so broad and like there's so many things you could do. But what are some maybe opportunities that you'd take advantage of? What are some things that you could build or some entry points maybe you could find to be a part of this thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually think that climate is incredibly wide. A lot of people tend to think of climate as, energy or as clean tech. And it's not that. The way we see it is, what's happening right now, it's a whole transition. It's a huge global transition we're going through, and everything is changing. What we eat, how we transport ourselves from place to place, how we live. Like everything is changing, and that is all climate. So climate is you could of course look at like what are the biggest areas there, but we're pretty wide on our concept of climate. So I think first of all, I would say that a lot of things touches climate, and a lot of SaaS companies are climate companies. A lot of AI companies are climate companies. So I actually think that it's kind of a bit of a misconception that climate and sustainability is its own sector. It is very much of a lens that you look at all the generalist companies at, or you look at all of the generalist companies and then try to figure out like, is this important enough? Is it worth solving? And that's how we do it, and therefore it is actually pretty wise. So if you try to think about what should be done, I really think about like what drives you. Are you excited about food? Are you excited about the future of food and our food systems? Do you care about adaptation and mitigation? Like, do you care about what does it look like? What does that transition look like? Or do you care about things like energy and really understanding that how can we get the grid working for all of us? How can we make it more green or renewable? Like, I really think just pick anything that really drives you, and then focus on that. And honestly, when people really go with their passion and they try to solve an actual problem, I feel like it's rare to end up saying that, oh, I could make this ad slightly better, and that's the biggest thing I care about. Like, of course, there are always going to be companies like that that's going to maximize something. And I think that's fine as well. But if you start with passion, quite often it's going to touch climate in some way.
Absolutely. I've interviewed, a few VCs so far, and a lot of times I hear the passion thing, like problem founder fit, and we're looking for people who are very obsessed with certain things. And often when I go to talk to early stage founders or even myself, and you think, well, what am I passionate about? And there's sort of like a blank sometimes, and it's very rare to see someone who has like that true self-awareness of like, oh, this is what I really love, this is what I deeply care about. Now you had that with, okay, you said I care about human rights, and you did the documentaries, you saw another opportunity that you became passionate about. If you're a young Haiti today, you're in your 20s or maybe even late teens, you're looking forward at the future thinking, what am I passionate about? What do I really care about? How would you find that? How did you personally find those things that you truly obsessively cared about?
I think just being curious, to be honest, being curious and reading and really just kind of going down those rabbit holes. For example, when we came into climate, like I said, my background was in human rights, and I was very focused on humans and the problems humans felt. And when it first came to climate, I wasn't very excited about it because I didn't have a way to connect with it. I felt so disconnected when people say, "Oh, we need to remove X amount of gigatons." I was just like, "Oh, very hard time feeling excited about that sentence, right?" And then I realized that the more I read about it, I thought, oh my God, it's crazy. I had no idea like that this happens. I had no idea that happened. And I found so many problems that actually really started exciting me. Yeah. And then I kind of realized, okay, there are things I'm passionate about here. And there's a lot of solutions that I am actually passionate about. But I had to start reading about it, and I had to start somewhere essentially. So I think it is the same thing. I think you'll probably have an inclination of, that, oh, I care about what I eat. And then the more you start learning about food systems and what you eat, there's going to be something that you're going to say that, did you know that, how bad fishing is, for example, and then that's going to be the industry. Or did you know the power of algae? And then you'll go really deep into algae, and then at some point you're going to say, this has to be something I can build here. So you're going to find your area the more you read, but you do have to start somewhere, and you have to start just doing your own research. And the wider you go, the the more problems you'll find, and then from there on you'll just pick what you feel most passionate about. But I agree, it's not like one of those things you just wake up and you say, hey, like I have it, like I'm passionate about this. The other thing is, I do think that these type of uh, venture builders such as EF and Antler, etc., like I think they're pretty good at that. Like you'll find a lot of people who are passionate about things, and sometimes you hear about something and you get convinced yourself, like this is something I want to work on, and I want to do something with someone else in this space. So they're good for that as well, just to be reminded of what problems are out there.
So basically, we could break down the advice like two things. One, be extremely curious, just like find threads that you can pursue and go down these random rabbit holes. And then two is like put yourself in environments where you can be around other passionate people, which then could reveal what you personally really deeply care about. Love that. The
Yeah.
follow up question I want to ask you is: let's say you found something, you've got an opportunity, you think you deeply care about it. I think a lot of founders sometimes tend to not understand what venture scalable means. So a lot of VC funds,
Yeah.
they're looking for very specific characteristics, very specific parameters that indicate, the venture can achieve certain returns. And obviously every VC has to do that because they've got LPs they have to report to. From your perspective, I know that it's very contextual, depends on the fund, but for you personally, what makes a startup, what makes an idea, what makes a venture scalable, and what makes it fundable in your eyes?
Yeah. Honestly, I think the there's a lot of kind of more obvious things, like is the market big enough? Like can you get to 100 million ARR? It's annually recurring revenue, and things like this. Like there's the kind of obvious things where you can kind of do some well, not easy, but you can do some calculations and trying to figure out, like, is it possible in this market? Like is the market big enough? Like is it reasonable? But then, to be honest, what really makes the it VC fundable for us is honestly the founder. A lot of it is that, is this a founder that we think, first of all, is passionate about the area, that they're going to stick with this the kind of 10 years plus that it takes to make this $1 billion company? Is it a person that can attract a team, that can lead a team? Is it a person that we want to see as a leader of tomorrow? Is it really, is it someone we want to work with for 10 years? Like it's a lot of those questions that mean that, is it interesting for Pale Blue Dots? And then, of course, it has to be a potential in the space, and there has to be some kind of business model. But business models change and the markets change. Like a lot of other things change. And of course, the founder grows as well. But it really is about that founder. Like, do you have what it takes, first of all? But second of all, do you want to do this? As in, do you want to take VC money? It's not an obvious thing either. A lot of people are much better off bootstrapping and building a different type of company that maybe isn't suited for VC money. And I think VC is a very, very particular type of way of building companies, and it's not for everyone. And I think I always try to be very honest with people that this is what we expect. Like if you now raise money from us, we want you to get this type of ARR in 12 to 18 months, and then you need to get to there, and then you need to get to there, and then you have to raise more money and more money and more money. And then people are like, no, I think I'm going to just raise one round. And I'm like, it doesn't really work like that. Like if you kind of get into the VC cycle, then you do have to kind of continue growing. And if you really want to build just more stable, smarter, stable company, then you should do that. But then VC probably isn't right for you. Then you should look at alternative funding and angel investors and grants and non-dilutive funding, everything else that's out there. And I think that's a really important conversation to have. So it's not just about us trying to figure out that, what makes this VC fundable. It's also for that person to think whether they should be on this path. And I do think that it's kind of a conversation that we should be having more openly, because it's not for everyone. And it's really important that people understand how VCs work. Essentially, that we have investors and what we promise our investors and when we have to give them the returns, etc. So they understand our incentives, because we have to be aligned if we're going to work together for, up to 10 years.
You talked about you had to break into the venture capital world as a human rights activist essentially, and it was quite difficult for you to do that. And I think there are a lot of people, a lot of founders who come from your kind of background than people who come from like the Stanfords with the startup experience
Yeah.
that can fundraise quite easily. If you're in young Hades' position today and you're looking at how do I break into venture capital, how do I break into startups, how would you do it? Like, how would you build trust and build relationships with investors? How would you approach fundraising differently? What are some maybe like tips that you would have looking back at your journey on things that you did that allowed you to break in?
Yeah. I think it's a really hard thing. I sometimes joke about the fact that I was mainly based in London. I was in London for about 12 years, but then I spent some time in Silicon Valley as well. And I think I tried to break into the London scene for about 3 years, really just trying to, you know, meet people on LinkedIn and go to all of the meetups and stuff and really get to know people. But no one was really taking me seriously, and it was really hard to get into the right rooms. Like London is very much like, well, at least it was very much about who you know at the time, and I didn't know anyone. Um, but then what kind of opened up some doors for me was definitely going through 500 startups, and going through the whole accelerator program, and first of all getting the network from that, but also just learning so much from that, because that's really the first time I actually honestly learned how VC and how finance actually works in this space, and understood what their kind of incentives and stuff are, which I didn't really before. So I also think kind of now in hindsight, I think I didn't approach it in the right way before, because I had no guidance. So I would say that you have to do your homework and get that guidance. So whether it is, I'm not always a fan of accelerators, because I actually think most of them aren't great, but I think there's a few of them, like 500 and YC, etc., that have been great. Um, but they're not always amazing, but sometimes those networks are quite necessary to get into. And if not, then I would try to just find allies. Nowadays I feel like there are more of those type of micro funds that really try to help people from underrepresented backgrounds, for example. And there's a lot more of these kind of angel networks where you'll find some people, and then eventually someone will kind of put you forwards, and really just surrounding yourself with those people. It's not often the funds, right? Because if someone comes to us and hasn't even had the kind of background and knowing how to set up a pitch deck and how to properly pitch to VCs, then you're too early normally to talk to VCs. But I feel like a lot of angels or microfunds, etc., can often help at that stage. And sometimes I do think an accelerator, if it's a good accelerator, I do think it might be what's necessary to just get that crash course to really understand the scene. And again, the tech scene is very strange. You really have to understand how it works and how fundraising works and how VCs work, and how what lean startup is, and just read those books and really have um, the same language essentially that others do, so that you can actually speak in the same way and be on the same page. And then once you have that, it'll be much much easier to actually be heard and be able to pitch your own startup.
You mentioned earlier, you said one thing was getting into accelerators that really helped you out, and then the other was reaching out for guidance and finding, in your words, allies. If you're a young founder today, I know one of them is okay. You can go try and join very well known and you know great accelerator like 500 startups YC, and obviously those are real hard to get in, so most people will get
Yeah.
rejected. So how would you then maybe find people who could mentor you or help you out? Like how did you find some of those? I know you said you struggled for years, and especially in a place like London. But how did you end up finding people who could guide you and say, "Look, here's how you make a pitch deck, and here's how you do this, and here's how you should structure your pitch"?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it took me a long time, but I did. I did just go to all the meetups that I heard about, like any events that I knew about. I remember, YC was doing like a summer school thing, and they had someone just come and speak about YC, and just going there and meeting them and talking to them and trying to understand like what are you actually looking for in these applications, etc. And and honestly, nowadays I feel like and I mean this is like 15 years ago, so there was a lot less out there. But nowadays I feel like they're really good kind of startup schools out there. Like you can really learn a lot by just reading. And maybe you could at the time as well. I just maybe didn't know the resources and where to find them. But nowadays I feel like yeah, you can find a lot on just YouTube or Googling and reading a lot of yeah, just reading a lot of things about how to build a startup and best practices and what are the main books I should read, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and from there on, yeah, you really just have to be a bit on top of LinkedIn and Twitter. Well, mainly LinkedIn, I would say. I'm not a huge fan of Weezy Twitter, but on LinkedIn, you can try to figure out who's whom in kind of funds and who you should be speaking with and who invests at what stage. You can follow companies that you really care about and try to read their press releases, etc., and see who's invested. A lot of angels also they like to put the companies that they've invested on their LinkedIn as well. So if you really look up companies that you admire or that you like, and then you can see who's invested, and you can reach out to those people and then ask them for who directions, etc. I feel like that's kind of a good place to start to try to figure out, try to map the full industry and figure out who you should know.
Absolutely. I'm sure you get a lot of people who reach out to you as a venture capitalist, a lot of people who message, email you, trying to reach out to you on LinkedIn. I want to talk about how how to tactically write a message, because I think a lot of people get it wrong. There's like, please help, I have this startup, and a lot of times they don't get replies and they wonder why. So, what are some maybe ways founders in the past have reached out to you that have made you want to have a conversation with them and actually help them out?
Yeah, I think it's really hard because when we first started the fund, or at least before when I was doing an accelerator, I really tried to be very responsive because I knew, I've been on that side and I know how hard it is. And nowadays I find it really hard. I think I have like 800 plus messages on LinkedIn I haven't replied to. Like it's terrible. And I scroll through them, but I just don't have time to like sit and start replying. So I just don't. And it does say on my LinkedIn that if you want to get a reply, just please send it to my email. So in my defense, I feel like people went deep enough, they know they won't get a reply on LinkedIn. Um, but anyway, I just don't have the time. I just can't help everyone as much as I'd love to. But what I would say is to really try to be targeted, try to really understand if you're reaching out to me, for example, is it because you actually are doing something in climate, or you specifically know what pillar I'm focusing on, or who I've invested in before and why I would personally care about it? Like if someone said, hey, I know you invested in Climate X and I've been following the journey, and we do something like this, and I thought you might like it because of this and that. And even if you say I'm super early, but I think there's something in the space, then I might be a bit like, okay, they actually genuinely, have looked into it and think I'm the relevant person. But if I get this generic email that say, this is my favorite, dear sir, please do this, then you're not going to get a reply from me because I know that you're just sending this to like every investor that you can get, that whose email you can get, and it's obviously not meant to me. And then you'll be a pretty quick archive in my inbox, to be honest. And I mean, to be honest, every deck we get, so even if it says dear sir, I will forward it to my partners and we will review it. But if I just get an email asking for help and stuff, and it's clearly a mass email, the best is when you get the unsubscribe button at the bottom of the email. It doesn't feel very personalized. So yeah, be as personalized as you can, and that's also what I mean. Like try to figure out on like LinkedIn and Crunchbase, etc., who you should be speaking with. And the other thing is, I get so many requests from people who aren't even doing anything close to kind of climate or impact or anything like that, and saying, hey, I'm building this game and I think you're the right person. I'm like, really? Gaming? You think I'm the right person? Like, you haven't dug very deep, because I really, really, I'm not very excited about gaming at all. So, then, yeah, it's hard to get a reply. But there's plenty other people who are really into gaming. Then try to find them instead.
Awesome. And then the last question I want to ask you is, earlier in one of your responses, you said sometimes you talk to founders where you're like, look, if we do fund you, you get into the VC cycle. This is a cycle. You have to keep raising money. You have to hit milestones. And a lot of people, they often think, oh, well, maybe that's not for me. I don't want to be on that treadmill. But if you do fund a founder, I know Pale Blue Dot is like super early stage. So you're often maybe even writing companies their first checks. If that's the case, how do you prepare the founders in the company for later fundraising rounds? What do you, let's say like you've gotten your check and you're a happy founder, but now obviously you still have to think about Series A, Series B, Series C, all these different series. How are you preparing them? How are you getting them to think about it? Like what kind of mindset shifts are they going through?
Yeah, honestly, like pretty soon after we invest, so we do pre-seed and seed. So let's say we did a seed round. Pretty soon after, I'll often do this kind of road to Series A workshop where I really kind of break down what's expected. Like, okay, if you're in B2B SaaS, like this is the kind of revenues people normally want to see, and this is the kind of stuff we want and need to hit. And then we say, can we hit that within 18 months? And if we did, how many people do we need? Like how much if sales cycles are this long, like when do we need to hit in sales? And then we kind of work our way backwards and we say, is this actually realistic? Can we do that? And of course, often they've had some plan as well that they've pitched us, but we kind of start putting those together and making a bit of a high level plan of how to get there. And then, I normally say that I can help you from like pre-seed to Series A. But then once they do get to their Series A, then there is another fund that's going to take over, that's going to essentially fund them and take board seats. I often step down from the board, and then that fund will then hopefully take them to Series B and tell them this is what's necessary. Like this is where you need to get, because I don't keep track of that, and I'm not like a Series B investor. So I feel like I kind of know my place of this is where I can help you, and I see all the companies go on that journey. So we have quite a lot of knowledge and what's happening in the scene and what the expectations are, so we can help them with that, and we can have those conversations and even in fundraising and tell them that you do realize that this is what the next stage will look like. And it is very important, I think, to have those conversations early, because people also, they don't think about it when they raise around. They're like, oh, we got this much money, and I'm like, yeah, but do you realize what the expectations are, and what your responsibilities are now with all of that money? Like you now need to get there, and if you get a lot more money, then you need to grow a lot faster, and it's just not always necessarily so much easier. It doesn't mean that you suddenly have 5 years to do it. Like that's not normally the case in VC. So yeah, people don't tend to realize this. So sometimes we try to educate them as much as we can on the journey to make it as smooth as possible.
Yeah, I know I mentioned this was my last question, but I do have one more follow-up if that's okay with you.
All
You
good.
mentioned you help founders calibrate a lot of their expectations, and sometimes they're excited that they got the money, but you're like, well, just understand there's like there's quite a bit of responsibility that comes with it, and you have to expect these things. I want to talk to you about maybe a bit more about the emotional side of being a founder. So, when you were in London, you mentioned the 3 years where you're doing everything to break in and you're going through these hard times. And I'm sure with portfolio management, you're talking to a lot of these founders who are executing in the grind of the day to day, but sometimes they are feeling quite discouraged, and sometimes doors are being shut on their face by customers or their next series of investors. How do you help founders navigate those times, and maybe what are some tips that you give them to maybe manage those emotions a bit and just be very patient?
Yeah, I think my first tip would be that choose investors that have been founders themselves. Um, I think I see a huge difference by working with other investors who actually have built something themselves and have gone through the journeys and have seen some of the hardship of trying to build something and convince the world of something and raise money for something that's in your head. And then what happens when things don't always work out as well. So I really think it's important to have people that you feel like care about you, as well as the journey and what you're building, and actually care about who you end up becoming on that journey as well. I do think that people always say, oh, it's like marriage, and there is definitely some truth to that. That is a pretty long-term partnership, and you shouldn't, it's not just money. Like I hate when people say that, oh, it's all money and it's all the same. It's not the same. I've had really shitty investors who really kind of dragged me down, and you know I know a lot of people who've gotten like mental health problems because of how hard it is to build things. So I really think that surround yourself by people who who you want to have on the journey and who will be there to support them. And I think it's really important that founders can come to us as well when things aren't going well, and especially that's when they need us and can talk to us. The other thing I would say is, not just with investors, but build your tribe in general. We're actually tomorrow going in an offsite with, I think, around 50 of our founders. We're going to an island just outside of the coast of Sweden for 2 days. And we're just going to be in the woods on this island. We're just going to do a lot of just, hanging out and and talking, in the woods, and doing some kayaking and swimming and stuff, and really just hanging out and getting to know them, and importantly, helping them form relationships with other founders that they can discuss the things that they're going through. And I think this is so important, to have your tribe, like have people that you can call when you're struggling, whatever it is with fundraising, or whether it is with sales, or whether it is with your co-founders. And like, you have to have people that you can reach out to, because it is really, really hard, and everyone's going to face a lot of challenges on this journey. So yeah, find your people, find the right investors who you want to have on your journey, and find the other crazy founders who really want to change the world, because there are really awesome people out there who really want to support each other.
There we go, Haiti. Well, that's it for the questions I've got. Is there anything that you'd like to add or talk about?
No, I'm thank you for having me. I'm excited to have been part of it, and I'm always excited to hear from founders who are building something, especially in the kind of climate space at an early stage. So if you're interested, then feel free to send me an email.